Auburn Gresham is a neighborhood located on the far south side of Chicago. It is also known as the Bungalow Belt as it contains roughly 80,000 of Chicago bungalow homes. There are around 46,000 residents that reside in the area. Community organizations work hard to ensure that local residents and visitors can contribute to the continuous growth of the neighborhood.
Our overall research question that we developed with the help of GDC states it's possible for Urban Gresham to have infrastructure to provide fresh produce to the community. Our hypothesis is that Urban Gresham can have the infrastructure to provide the fresh produce if the community was to better educate about the issues and or to better leverage current assets.
Auburn Gresham currently lacks the adequate infrastructure to provide fresh produce to the community. About 53% of families in the community are at risk of food insecurity. 20% report eating 5 or more servings of fruits and vegetables daily, and there's a 65% rate of easy access to fruits and vegetables. The neighborhood contains 11 grocery stores and about 5 community gardens. When comparing this data to a neighborhood with a similar population but in a different area, Lincoln Square, the data varies greatly. Over the past 6 weeks, we surveyed residents of Auburn Gresham and its neighboring communities and found that the majority of them travel more than 3 miles for fresh produce. In addition, almost 60% of those surveyed were not aware of community gardens in their neighborhood. With this data, we can conclude that there is an asset deficiency related to fresh produce accessibility.
The most important negative health conditions in Auburn Gresham related to accessibility to fresh produce are a higher risk of diabetes, hypertension, and heart disease, as well as mortality rates associated with these health conditions.
As shown by the visuals, 42% of adults in Auburn Gresham are obese, 14% of adults have diabetes, and 38% of adults experience hypertension. Mortality rates for these diseases are shown in the graphic.
When we compare this data to a community that neighbors Auburn Gresham, such as Roseland, we see a similarity in rates for the disease aforementioned.
However, when we compare Auburn Gresham's data to Lincoln Square, which has a similar population count as Auburn Gresham but different demographics, we see lesser rate for the previously mentioned health outcomes due to the greater access to fresh produce.
White flight is the underlying cause of the lack of fresh produce to Auburn Gresham. White flight is a sudden or gradual large-scale migration of white people from areas becoming more racially or ethnoculturally diverse. The decade of 1960 was marked by a massive racial demographic shift by ending the redlining, which stopped blacks from moving into majority white neighborhoods. In the early years of 1960, Auburn Gresham consisted of 60,000 residents and 98% were white. Less than 20 years later, the community shifted to 62,000 residents and 96% were black. By 1970, Auburn Gresham had lost most of its commercial investment. When white people moved out, they took their business and resources with them. The sudden decline in the amount of black-owned businesses, youth recreation, senior housing, quality schools, banks, and other commercial services took away the importance or the view of importance of other necessities in the community, such as fresh produce.
For our first policy response, we're focusing on how to create and sustain the infrastructure needed for our fresh produce. One of the first steps we will need to complete is finding a space where we can create the garden. With research, we were able to find a vacant lot on 77th and Ashland that will allow us to produce a spacious and accessible space for our garden. Next, we can work with city officials, for example, the Chicago Police Department, the aldermen, and etc., to go through the steps needed to own and protect our newly bought land. After securing the space, we will need to work alongside leaders within urban development to understand the timeline, resources, and materials we will need.
Policy response 2 would be educating and getting the community together. We can inform people by having posters throughout the neighborhood. Broadcasting information on all large social media platforms such as Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. We could offer jobs to the teens that live in the community, also volunteer work from residents of the community. Getting the local schools involved so we could get the information about the garden/greenhouses throughout the whole Auburn Gresham.
With the data collected through MAPSCORP, we feel that the prevalence of schools and religious institutions could be used to reach a broad audience and would be extremely productive with increasing advocacy and educating the public. We as field coordinators and mappers would like to thank MAPSCORP and the GAGDC for all their help this summer. Everyone on our team had a great time and learned valuable information that will help us with the goal of improving underserved communities in Chicago. Thank you so much.